All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Josette Dubois. I am the Adult Programs Librarian for Slover Library, and this is Joan Motley on the screen here with Interim HealthCare, and she's going to be presenting a little presentation about dementia. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. I'm going to unmute her, and then we will get to her PowerPoint and begin the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I was asked by Gisette to coordinate this program, online via Zoom just recently because I was actually programmed on the calendar to have done this in person. Of course, with the virus role, limited with being in front of each other in person. So I was quite excited and overjoyed to be invited to do this. A little bit about my background for a moment so that you understand how I developed this and why. I am actually known as the business development representative for Interim Home Care. Quite often, I'm actually also referred to as the family liaison. So I really spend a lot of time guiding and supporting and directing families. It's very important to me to know that a family understands all options and is educated the right way to truly understand what do we have on our plate. I often find that many families are unaware as to what exactly is going on with somebody's diagnoses, and I find it concerning that families are caught off guard, and crises many times hits the fan with the family. That being said, I am fairly new to the area of Virginia Beach. I'm actually a Long Island New Yorker that just moved down here in the past year and a half. Where I lived up north, I actually had developed an extensive background in Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And I've put together this presentation, again, as a means of trying to educate and support families on all angles. This presentation actually is now one of 15 programs that I've now developed. I've taken advantage of this quiet time with, keeping confined in many ways and with being out and about too much. I've been very busy programming and developing new educational tools and seminars. So typically, I do go into many different types of communities and do these presentations as a means of support and helping families realize who I am. So that being said, when I developed, again, this particular presentation, what do we have on our plate? It was because the background is because I find too often crises is hitting and families are not quite aware as to what actually is going on with their loved one and what their loved one is actually exhibiting. So, so understanding that continuum of care is really important for a family to get a grip on in order to have sustained them in that home or to have understood all the options then outside of the home. So we'll kind of delve into this now. We'll go on to the second screen technically. Can you go on to the next screen? Okay, thank you so much. And this presentation normally would be equivalent to about an hour and a half long, believe it or not. We've actually broken this up into 2 different weeks. So this week I'm doing the first half of the presentation, and in about 2 weeks' time, I'm going to do the second part of the presentation. So I kind of look at this from a spectrum of how we have to kind of educate families and understand the impact on us worldwide and in the United States. So when you realize that we actually have over 50 million people worldwide right now that are living with dementia, that number is increasing, continuously, and we have the knowledge of knowing that we have about 5.8 million in the United States. The 5.8 million, though, are only the ones that we know about. And I say that to you because there are way too many people that are not following through with understanding a diagnosis and not following through with going to a neurologist, because having a neurologist help us understand exactly what type of decline this is, what type of dementia is this, is really important. So if families are hearing that word dementia now linked to their loved one, thinking that is it, then they're going to be taken off guard continuously through this decline process. So the 5.8 million, again, are only the ones that we actually know about because they've actually gone through the channels of getting a diagnosis and going in the direction of a neurologist. So the projections are going to be increasing over 14 million by the year 2050. And those of us that have been in a caregiver role or currently in a caregiver role also are quite aware, preaching to the choir in many ways, that this is a huge, exhausting experience. If someone has never been in a caregiver role, it would be very difficult for them to understand the burnout, the exhaustion, the overwhelming demands that are associated with this type of role. And there are huge financial ramifications and their own health issues actually also that take a big toll in a decline, especially if the primary caregiver is trying to do it all on their own. If we don't have enough support coming from extended family members, or we're not knowledgeable about hired help, or perhaps we're not aware of the types of help that we can have come into a home or elsewhere, that burnout and exhaustion does continue to hit the fan for that primary caregiver. We do have over 80% of the care that typically is provided by family members, or perhaps we're trying to reach out to those extended family members or friends to kind of step in. If we're trying just to sustain this on our own without hired help, that primary caregiver will soon learn that it is quite challenging to continue to attempt this on their own without the support and help coming on in. If you don't have the right support and help coming on into a home, then there's truly no way that you can sustain this picture without more and more crises hitting. So the burnout of the primary caregiver is a huge concern. And we often find that their own health and well-being tumbles. You know, when you realize that there is so much that goes into the care and coordination of somebody's care, it's almost as if, if for those of us that are, in a parent role, for instance, we know that, our kids come first, right? And so we many times as a parent leave our own needs and things to the side because our focus is on them. Well, it's almost the same type of philosophy. We put our own doctor appointments to the side. We might feel guilty if we take the time out for ourselves and put on those sneakers, and so it's very important that the primary caregiver does carve out time for themselves to decompress. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next screen. All right, so many times families say to me, what should we be looking for, and and what is this what is normal aging? When we walk into a room and we forget why the heck we walked in there, right? Where are the keys? Where's my phone? Where are my glasses, right? It happens to the best of us, and that is normal, thank goodness. All right. But what becomes a not so normal thing is when we start to see that somebody is doing this multiple times in one day. So especially if somebody begins to exhibit the constant asking and repetitiveness of the same questions, that should be a concern. Or looking at an item and then forgetting what an item is called, or looking at a set of keys and forgetting what the purpose is of these keys. Where am I supposed to go with this? When we think of risk factors, there are many different types of risk factors. To kind of focus in a little bit, though, on some primary ones that we need to really consider is the fact that if somebody does have a connection with diabetes, that is a huge link to the potential of having a form of dementia down the line, as well as if somebody has a link to hypertension, has been diagnosed with hypertension. If somebody also has perhaps a hearing loss and we never quite follow through with getting the proper devices to assist us with that. Or, maybe I have the devices, but I have my pride and, oh gosh, I don't want anybody to see these in my ear. So, you might have somebody that is very headstrong and perhaps uncooperative. So they're going to keep those ear devices to the side and not wear them. But hearing loss is also a very big contributor to the potential of dementia. When you also see that somebody might be a very big drinker for many number of years, that's also another big risk factor, as well as somebody that is a big smoker for a number of years. We also need to realize that when somebody is isolated, when somebody is not getting involved in interaction and engaging with family and friends, and they prefer to be isolated, or maybe not even necessarily that they want to be isolated, but they like to just do their own thing. Maybe they're limited to resources around them. People that have a lack of stimuli in their lives are also at a very high risk. So it's very important that we go out and about, that we are engaging in activity, engaging in, getting involved in Bible study classes, library discussion, book discussion groups, any kind of functions where we know that, church functions, anything that we know that there is a gathering or event, we should be encouraging ourselves to participate in that. But people that have a lack of stimuli are also at a very high risk. Believe it or not, also another very big risk factor for those that are in poverty, actually, are also at a very high risk. When you realize that those that are perhaps less fortunate than ourselves do not have the resources to go to the doctors, they perhaps cannot afford insurance, they are not eating well. Those are all very big factors that also, not eating well will also contribute to our decline, and also added to a risk of potential dementia. But we need to realize that if we exercise more, that this is a very healthy thing that we should be doing for ourselves. Even putting on those sneakers for the minimum of a half hour, 3 to 4 times a week is a very good thing. It helps to continue to develop neurons in our brain, getting the reproduction of neurons, where we need to have as many built up and stored as possible, because as we start to have more and more of a decline as the years continue, we begin to draw on all these extra, the memory bank, and all this extra education perhaps that we have learned and produced over time. So I do want to mention to you that what I'm trying to tap into now actually is the fact that when you have somebody that's very educated, that they have that they have a strong background in education, that they have been successful in a career, in a profession, that they have had perhaps a voice of authority in life, that they've actually been extremely independent for a number of years. These are all pieces of what helps somebody to sustain themselves and continue to go underneath that radar for that much longer span of time. So when you do have somebody that has been very highly intelligent, they are able to go underneath that radar, coasting along, learning basically how to modify themselves to their new abilities. So many times people have a real difficult time understanding, what do we see in somebody, and is this really their normal way about them, or is there something extra here that we should be taking a closer look at? That becomes the not so normal part. Steps to determine a diagnosis. Many times you might see that a family begins to go in the direction of a primary care physician, and we begin to hear that dialogue of, yes, there's a memory concern. All right, perhaps let's start off with a little mini mental assessment to see on a scoring system where somebody is showing us their level of perhaps confusion or apprehension in answering a question correctly. They're struggling. Oh, I don't know. Leave me alone. I don't care what today's date is. I've been retired for years. I mean, we begin to see a lot of excuses by somebody when you begin to ask somebody with a memory issue a direct, pinpoint blank, direct question. Focus on how they are actually responding to you. If you begin to see a lot of aggravation and they're starting to become very defensive with you, then those become some red flags that we should be taking note of. So If the primary care physician, after even doing a little mini mental assessment, begins to even say to us, yes, this individual appears to have dementia, and leaves it at that, see in 6 months, and out the door the family goes. And families walk out thinking, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do now? And God, all right, so we know that dementia means that there's a memory issue, but okay, this isn't so bad. I got this under control. Okay, I can do this, right? So everybody continues to coast and coast and coast until more and more crises hits and hits and hits. If a family was not directed and guided to go on to a neurologist, then we have failed them. We have failed not providing the right education to them to realize the importance of establishing a baseline at a neurologist level to determine what is this exactly, okay? So sometimes physicians might begin to say to us, oh, this is old age. Well, sure, there tends to be some memory issues when there is, when we're aging, among all sorts of other things that unfortunately begin to happen to us as we're aging. But what becomes, again, the not so normal is when you do begin to see that perhaps somebody is repetitive and showing that much more confusion and becoming perhaps that much more reliant on us to complete the task of X, Y, and Z. They've always used to be able to do it before, but now all of a sudden, oh no, they're digging in the heels. They don't want to do this, they don't want to do that. So when we go in the direction of a neurologist, we need to make sure that the individual with the memory issue is not just making this kind of a trip on their own. That we have somebody that is going to be vocal and honest, sitting by their side. Sometimes we might see that it is a couple, so you have the declining spouse and the well spouse, and it's quite common that we begin to see that the well spouse is covering up for the ill spouse. So they kind of brush things aside. Oh, it's not so bad. They're fine. Just a little bit of memory issue, and they kind of, they're apprehensive about admitting to the decline. And when you really realize this, though, it becomes there's quite a loss with this. There's quite a loss because if a family or a spouse in particular has to admit to this decline, then this becomes a huge blow to us as a couple. So all of these dreams and things that we had once had together now, oh gosh, what's going to happen with these trips and all these things that we had wanted to continue to do. So it's a very big loss especially when you have a spouse situation and you are now playing more of that role of that go-to. Many times we see that as an adult son or a daughter, they might also have difficulty recognizing the signs, especially if they're not living in the same area or in the same four walls. Let's be wary of how, mom or what have you might answer the phone. Hey, mom, how's it going? Oh, great. Well, what did you do today? Nothing special. Well, you know what? I have some time today. I can take you to lunch. Let's go out to lunch. Oh, where should we go? Oh gosh, I don't know. Where do you want to go? Right? So watch how the individual with the memory issue is kind of giving you a response, but giving you a whole roundabout response, almost making you think that they answered the question, but they truly have not. Right? So sometimes we walk away and we're like, oh, well, God, wait a minute. Did they answer the question? Oh, and we walk around thinking, I feel like I'm losing my mind here, with where we left off with something. But we have to make sure if we go to a neurologist that we are extremely vocal, that we are not holding things back, that we are as honest as possible about what are we doing for this person today that we have never had to do for this person before. How are we showing how are we getting more involved in their day-to-day direction and activities and reminding them for things? It would be wise that a primary caregiver or extended family members begin to take note. Get a little marble notebook from the dollar store and start to take note. What is changing with this person on a day-to-day basis? What are we doing again for them today or this past month that we have never had to get involved with before? So taking note of something like this, and then even indicating on that kind of a journal, today was a good day. thank goodness, right? Oh, and this is what we did. This went real smooth. Oh gosh, but this thing was really bad. This did not work out very well. But this is how I was able to kind of redirect that person. So take note of what was good, what was bad, what was a challenge, because then if we go to that neurologist, we'll be able to whip out that book and say, yeah, you know what, this is what I'm seeing. So we can start to kind of look at some of the facts more, because it is going to be difficult for a caregiver to always remember these little details, fine details, especially realizing that this is pretty significant. It's not just this one time that this thing happened. Oh gosh, look back over here on these other pages. Oh yeah, holy cow, man, I didn't realize that happened over there too, all right? So we start to take note of this and realize that now there's a pattern that's developing perhaps, and it might also help a family member or caregiver begin to see how we might be transitioning from one stage of a decline into another. So don't be surprised when we go to a neurologist that we're going to have some blood work done, and there should also be some scans that are involved. They should be doing some brain scans to be able to take a proper look and an image on what actually are we seeing on this brain. So depending on where the shrinking is, depending on where we're beginning to see this damage, will begin to help us identify the likeliness that this is one disease versus another. So when people say to me, why do I need to have a diagnosis? I mean, gosh, dementia is dementia, and that's just all there is to it, and sometimes I even hear that perhaps a physician has even said, well, it's dementia, maybe here's some meds and just handle it, and people continue to go around coasting along until there's more and more of the crises. When I think of how many times people have said to me, why do I need to understand this diagnosis? I mean, I heard that it was dementia. I know there's a memory loss, what else do I really need to know? And it's almost like I want to, jump in and say, my goodness, why wouldn't we want to know? There's nothing but advantages to us to understand exactly what this thing is. Without us understanding exactly what this diagnosis is, we're not going to understand which type of decline is it, which type of disease perhaps are we looking at. Because if we don't understand which disease this is, there's no way a family is going to understand how this thing is going to be moving and grooving and accelerating in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. And if our goal is to have kept this person in this house to their last breath, we're going to want to know this detail. So when families are not understanding that there's something much bigger and greater above and beyond that word dementia, then they're going to be at a continuous loss with constantly planning, and even the planning with not only understanding what's going to come in through that door within a matter of months in another year or so, but also how is this going to hit the fan to us financially? So how are we planning for that part? Have we ever dealt with an elder lawyer before? Have we ever protected our assets and understood the steps that we should be doing to get somebody even eligible for something like Medicaid? Have we ever even completed those advanced directives so that we understand what our wishes are, what our loved ones' wishes are? Because if somebody is beginning to show us a memory issue, and now we know that there's a form of dementia, we need to recognize that we're dealing with a progressive disease. We're dealing with something progressive. And there's only a window of time that we truly have that the individual will be able to make decisions, but they're going to have enough capacity to understand what is before them, be able to make decisions, and ultimately be able to legally sign off on these documents and help a family avoid going into a guardianship role, which is, and I'm going to discuss the advanced directives in 1 second. Another big reason why, too, we need to understand the diagnoses is because that might open up our dialogue with what type of medications to have even thought about, as well as something really huge. And that huge thing becomes, gosh, what is connected to us in a family tree? What is this thing, right? Because if I have a family, and I produce my own children, then gosh, how is this potential gene now going to not only affect me, but affect them, and then potentially even continue on to their children and so on. So understanding which disease this is majorly important, because just like we all need to know, does diabetes run in our family? Does high blood pressure run in our family? These are very important details for us all to be aware of. So when I use that term advanced directives, many times families are unfamiliar with that terminology, and we know that it's an umbrella term that's used to discuss our wills, our living wills, our power of attorney, and our healthcare proxies. So when we might speak to someone, of age, somebody that is older than us, sometimes we might begin to hear them say, oh, with a lot of pride, "Oh, I have my will. Here you go. I got my will. I'm good to go." Right? Well, that's great, but we need to realize again that that's one of four items total that we really need to have in our possession. So when we realize the will, and we think about that, yep, we're now starting to say to our family members and so forth, this is my legacy, and this is who I wanted to go to. And so that is certainly something that will come into play after we have passed. But let's realize, though, if we have not taken the right estate planning steps, the asset protection steps, what's truly going to be left for our loved ones at the end really becomes a big question mark. When we think of that living will, we need to realize that it's very important that we all put down in writing that, to what extent do we want to have our care provided to us when we are no longer have the ability to verbalize these things. So let's say, God forbid, one of us gets into a car accident later on today, or one of us has a heart attack. Now we're laying in a bed at a hospital setting, and maybe we're in a coma, maybe we're having great difficulty communicating. Well, this living will then would have specified for these physicians exactly to what extent we would have agreed to have had our care. What are these things that we had already acknowledged that we want to have done, and to what extent we were okay with it being done? Have I ever agreed to life support? And if I did, what was the length of time that I felt that I should be on life support before I am comfortable with a family, unplugging me from such a thing? Have I ever agreed to a feeding tube? And at what point did I ever say that only, 3 days in, 4 days in, if there's really no hope, and maybe there's more than one doctor that's all agreed on my situation, I would have felt comfortable in disconnecting, and removing me of that. So it's very important that families realize what the person's wishes are from a living will standpoint. When we do not have this document done, many times we might be standing over somebody in a hospital setting. Everyone is debating. Family members all have their opinions, and everyone's debating about this, that, the other thing. So even though I might be the extended family member in the room, we really need to realize that it's not necessarily what we would have wanted, but what would have this person have agreed to? What did they agree to? Do we have these copies in our hand? When we think of the healthcare proxy, one person is appointed at a time. We need to make sure, though, this document is set up for success. So we want to make sure there's also a second person that is chosen that's also on this document. Only in the event that the first person was unavailable or no longer willing, then that's when that person would have been removed, and perhaps that second person then would have stepped on in. Or perhaps even that first person has predeceased us. So we always want to make sure that there is another person that would have come in line, and maybe even a third person, just to have another backup system. So without having a healthcare proxy appointed, any one of us would have had a great difficulty connecting with any physician to try to talk about our loved one's decline. With HIPAA regulations, things are very, very strict. We'd have great difficulty talking about not only somebody's diagnoses, but to also understand perhaps medications that were prescribed. And, if we opened up somebody's medicine cabinet at home, we might begin to see that, gosh, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a good 15, 20 different types of meds going on in there. And, really what is contradicting one medication from another? These doctors really do not know of each other many times. And so it really is important that we have a family member that would help to play that role of connecting those dots. So choosing a healthcare proxy is very important in the event that we have difficulty now following through with our own doctors and perhaps even a diagnosis. And lastly, the power of attorney. The durable power of attorney actually is the most important document of all, and it's truly gold. And we need to make sure that we are also putting this into a picture of success by appointing perhaps more than one person. Perhaps even, 2 or 3 other individuals as a backup. Sometimes I see that perhaps 2 older siblings both need to agree simultaneously, or one sibling is allowed to just go ahead and follow through on something financially without necessarily speaking to the other sibling. So with the power of attorney, now that particular person is going to play the role of handling anything financially, getting involved with, to what extent are we allowed to get involved in selling property, maneuvering assets, applying for Medicaid, setting up, bills, or speaking to any financial institution that we've ever invested our monies in. Anyone that does not have the power of attorney would have great difficulty in connecting with any of those types of institutions. So even going to a local bank, I've witnessed the challenges that families have if they don't have something that goes into great detail. And I say that to you because we can certainly go online and complete these documents, print these things off and have family all agree who's going to play what role, and go down to the bank and get it notarized. And there we go. For $30, it's done, and that's all well and good for many people out there. That is not necessarily an avenue that I would have suggested to somebody. I really would have suggested more so going in the direction of an elder lawyer, especially if we have a lot of assets, if we have property and joint accounts. We need to make sure that the documents are done thoroughly and completely, because a lot of laws and regulations have greatly changed during these years. And we need to make sure that things are updated properly. So even if we've had these documents done that were over 10 years of age old, then I would say it would be wise for these individuals to go down to a local elder lawyer and have them review these documents to make sure that nothing has to be changed and updated, what wording might have changed. Especially if somebody is from one state to another state, making sure that some of those, guidelines are still appropriate for the state that we might be in now. When families know that there is a decline and a memory issue, and the individual is beginning to show some challenges with making decisions, we are dealing with a small window of time where it'll be very wise for the family to make sure that these advanced directives are completed. When somebody has too much of a significance of a decline, they're not able to make decisions for themselves. They're sitting down now trying to sign off on something, but we can clearly see that they are repetitive and too much confusion. Then it would not surprise me that an elder lawyer felt that now we've kind of crossed a threshold where this individual is no longer capable of understanding the details of these documents. Therefore, they're no longer permitted to sign off on them. So when we've missed that window of time to get these documents done, and there's too much confusion now, that is typically when I begin to see a family have to go in the direction of getting a guardianship position now for their loved one. And guardianships are not cheap. We're talking thousands of dollars. So now let's say a family has difficulty coming up with those funds. So in that particular situation, we might need to go down the road to, between APS, Adult Protective Services, to look for some support, having a district attorney's office help us, get before a judge to now see what we can do about having a guardian appointed, because if there's a lot of challenges in a family dynamic, you might see that a judge might be apprehensive about appointing a particular family member or anybody within a family at all. They might feel it might be best a situation that we go outside a family and have a geriatric care manager or somebody else, appointed and hired now to play that guardianship role. But it is a huge undertaking. It's a very expensive one, a huge emotional whirlwind that goes into this. And a lot of this, though, can be totally avoided if we were quick in understanding a diagnosis, understanding the types of medications to perhaps put in play, and getting the family and this individual educated in the importance of getting their advanced directives done while they can still make those decisions. If anybody also needs some direction for any elder lawyers, I can give you some direction on that. Even some elder lawyers in the Virginia Beach area that will even sit down with you pro bono or with the family pro bono when they realize that that I suggested that you reach out. So it kind of pays to know me. So another part I want to touch on is the Medicaid planning and the asset protection steps that go with it. This is important. Let me just sip of water for one moment. When we think about someone declining and digging in their heels about, resenting any family involvement, and or they're resisting and pushing back on all care that we're trying to bring in through that door, and we're thinking, oh gosh, no, they don't want it, they're not ready for it, they don't want it. Okay, all right, well, again, we need to keep track of what what are they showing us with some of these declines and issues that they can no longer handle on their own. And realize that, again, if our goal is to have kept this person in this house, then we need to make sure that the care is eventually brought on in. When we have somebody that is declining, and now we had a fall, injury, or illness, and now we are going down the road to a hospital setting. Once we're in the hospital for up to 3 days, Medicare says, oh, sure, we'll let this person go on to a rehab if that was something that the family was in agreement to. When we're laying in a bed for 3 days, we certainly become weak and our legs get a little jello-y, and we might, have difficulty walking down a hall. And so we might kind of hold, watch how they kind of walk down, down their own hallway in their home or what have you, and how they might kind of glide their hand along a wall for support. But if we start to see from a physical therapist and in a hospital setting that this person is unsteady, their gait is unsteady, and they would benefit from physical therapy, a family might be given the option of going into a rehab or having the physical therapy come home. And we call that home health, right? So if a family said, oh, no. I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to go to a rehab. I just want my loved one to come home. All right, so let's understand what you've just done if we were to go in that direction. If we just go from a hospital setting into a situation where now we are in the home with just trying to have that physical therapy piece, many times I actually refer to just having that part in there a Band-Aid fix, because that Medicare will only cover that for a certain number of visits. When those visits are done, when we've tapped that out, then the family is still stuck in a position where there's no more physical therapy, and we have to eventually get, again, the hired help in that house. But oh gosh, if I never allowed it before and I never agreed to it before, how are we going to all of a sudden get this thing in now where I'm now going to be cooperating to accept it? If a family, however, had gone into a rehab setting, then we have equivalent to the first 20, 21 days that are now fully covered underneath Medicare insurance. After those first 20, 21 days, now we go into a window of time where now up to 100 days, we'll see that Medicare will now cover 80% of that bill. We are responsible for the other 20%, unless somebody was able to have another supplemental insurance policy that would have covered the additional cost. If now a social worker, we know that a social worker has to plan a safe discharge, and now we're at a point where now we start to realize that we have to plan this exit. Oh gosh, well, what are we doing? We want to take our loved one home? Oh, sure, we want to bring them home. Okay, great. So, but what kind of care you got going on in there? Oh, wow, never had any care before, never got mom or dad or anybody used to care before. Oh, geez, how are we going to get this person home now, right? How are we going to make this a success? Going to be a very big challenge. If we realize that the person had always been very resistant to care and we're having difficulty even affording care in our home, we might have to go down the road in the direction of a SNF, a skilled nursing home facility now, okay? Now, skilled nursing home facilities, that long-term placement, you think of a skilled nursing home, you have long-term placement part of the building, and the other half of the building is the rehab piece. Typically, I do see, somewhere around like $10,000 a month is what the average cost would be for a skilled nursing home placement for long-term. So if we have to think in terms of staying there for long-term now, how are we going to pay for this? If we're talking about some very big numbers that are going to be hitting our wallet, this is where it becomes important that a family have realized, the importance of going in the direction of an elder lawyer and even having had those asset protection steps done ages ago, because now we have to give a 5-year look back, a window of documentation, proof of all of my income for the past 5 years, a proof of all of my assets and everything that I've invested in, my home, my property, everything during these past 5 years. And now if we have to produce these 5 years of documentation to a skilled nursing home, and now they have to apply for chronic Medicaid for us, that 5-year look back, they're going to easily see all this value. So many times we begin to realize that if a family has never protected this, and now we have to go into that skilled facility, Medicaid would have a field day in our situation. Not only many times do I see that a family has to pay out of pocket a significant amount of money to initially get somebody into that building, but we also have to realize that Medicaid guideline also says in every state that Medicaid has to come after the remaining estate of somebody, even after they've passed, to now relinquish back those funds in order to reimburse that facility, reimburse basically the state for now having to pay out for all that care for the past year, 2 years, and so on. So a family, it could be quite up the creek if they have never protected that home in estate planning. I have seen situations where families realize that now there is a lien on their house, that their home is now being, they're being forced to sell their home. That the state now, Medicaid is now coming after their assets, because they certainly know what we have, because we just produced the 5-year look back. So they know where this and the other thing is. So we avoid that, though, by doing the proper estate planning with, again, an elder lawyer, laying it all out on the table and letting the elder lawyer realize, where do we have these funds? Where do we, where are the retirement accounts? Where do we have these joint accounts? What is the value of our home? And the sooner we begin to do any trust, the better off we are. So there are typically 2 different types of trust. You have the irrevocable trust or the revocable trust. They both have pros and cons to them. This is something that an elder lawyer definitely should be reached out to, so you understand which is better for you. But typically I do see that families need to go in the direction of the irrevocable trust, because this is the best type of trust to now begin to truly protect those assets to our last breath, especially if we have to apply for Medicaid and now we have to leave the home. So when we do these trust measures, we're also getting somebody now eligible for home-based Medicaid. So when somebody now is eligible for home-based Medicaid, you can have up to a good 40 hours a week of care in that home. So that is something that then specific agencies, home care agencies, can then be contacted to now take the necessary paperwork from you to get somebody approved and accepted for Medicaid underneath their care. The type of documentation that I would have asked for typically from a family is a UAI, that a universal assessment. So usually about a good 30 plus pages long, where we begin to review it and making sure that somebody is appropriate for the type of level of care that we can provide. And so that is a wonderful resource for families to be able to use that home-based Medicaid, especially if their pockets are running dry. Okay, all right, next screen. Okay, so beginning phases, many times if we start to hear that somebody has dementia, we might begin to, or actually even say prior to even hearing the word dementia, we certainly are recognizing that somebody has some slight memory issues. We begin to hear the word MCI. MCI is known as mild cognitive impairment, and it tends to be known as the precursor to dementia. So if we begin to hear at one point in time somebody had been diagnosed with MCI, we need to realize, though, that we are going to be seeing a progression of a decline, a progression with their memory issues, and to start taking note as to when things more significantly are becoming a concern. So when we start to hear the word dementia, I put my little umbrella there because dementia truly is an umbrella term. It's an array of symptoms. It's a mess. Okay, and when we hear the word dementia, we need to realize that it means that the individual has a cognitive decline in their ability to reason and function and process any information, and their memory recall is affected. So that's the true definition of dementia. So when you hear that somebody now is saying, "Oh, my loved one has dementia," we need to always ask a very important question, or in this case, a family should always be asking their doctor, that neurologist, that very important question. And that question does become, what type of dementia is this? That is the ultimate question. So we need to understand what type of dementia is it in order for us to be able to plan and strategize and be able to understand how this thing is going to move and groove as these months and years continue, and how is that going to affect us ultimately, providing that care and support and sustaining them where they are, and how again are we going to pay for this financially? Okay, going to go on. You turn the screen. Thank you. So now when we think about those most common diseases that fall underneath that terminology, we start off with Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is the largest form of dementia. It is the most commonly diagnosed, and it is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States for anyone that is 65 years of age and over. And it is a growing epidemic. We certainly have, these baby boomers that are up there in age. We have a great healthcare system, so we're helping everybody live longer, but it is costing us more and more money out of our pockets to continue to sustain this person with this type of decline. So we need to understand how, again, are we going to be strategizing? And if it is Alzheimer's disease, which one is it? So now sometimes we begin to hear early onset or late onset. Early onset, though, would be this would be a very sad situation. Don't get me wrong, this whole thing is certainly sad. But in particular, what I mean by this, though, is with early onset, we're going to have somebody super young. We're going to have somebody perhaps as young as 35 years of age, going up to maybe about the 65 years of age. Anyone that has a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's, not only is this going to be a fairly young individual, but now most likely they had a career, they have a job that they can no longer perform. If they can no longer perform their job duties, then they're going to be let go. So these individuals typically have to go for early retirement deals and or let go from a boss's standpoint, because their co-workers perhaps are attempting to cover up for them, or are becoming annoyed that they're actually doing this individual's work. So you'll also see that somebody that has an early onset case, now the stages, the progression of the disease goes very fast. So you have all these stages that are now crunched up together, and they really go very, very fast on the individuals. Anyone with an early onset case also, though, we need to recognize that this typically has a very big connection with family. In other words, it's a very strong hereditary link. So if I had a father that had this type of diagnosis, I should be aware of what that could mean for me down the line, growing up, growing older, and perhaps the effect it would have, even the concern it would have for my own family and children. When we think of late onset, we start to see a lot more of late onset cases, because now we have an older individual. More so into the 70s and 80s would have been that type of diagnoses. By the way, early onset cases are very unique in many ways, because it only makes up 5% of our entire population. Only, well, 5% is 5% still. It's a nice chunk. And I can say to you offhand that I've actually been involved in way too many early onset cases with families. And it's quite devastating to see the ramifications it has on a family, because now if I can no longer work, but I was the breadwinner in a house, now I'm at home. So now somebody else has to pick up that lead and now start a career perhaps, or take on more hours to now help to support our home, and now also become my caregiver. And we have young families, probably still in high school, college, and so on. So that becomes a huge mess for a family. Late onset, again, now we have more so into the 70s and 80s. The pace of the disease now will just go a wee bit slower. We still have a progression of a decline, but it's just a little bit slower. Very, very consistent with how it's moving along, but we might see longer stretches of plateaus with an individual, more stretches of a plateau, and then there'll be a little bit of a dip, and we'll say, oh gosh, well, okay, now what? Everybody kind of gets into a tizzy, and they didn't expect that thing to happen, and then a person begins to plateau again. So with early onset, now we start to see that there is a good 50-50 risk that these are chromosomes passed down through a family tree. We need to, realize that if we had ever wanted to go on for our own testing, that is certainly available. Genetic testing is what we would say. There's pros and cons of going in that type of a route, and that's a whole other part of a conversation. But you'll see, though, again, late onset just goes a little bit slower for somebody. Vascular dementia would have been brought on if we start to realize that somebody has had any coronary issues, multiple strokes, perhaps. When we start to realize that even though vascular dementia is number 2, it is really creeping up there quite fast alongside the Alzheimer's disease percentile. There are a lot of people that have coronary issues, and unfortunately, if somebody did have a stroke, it wouldn't surprise me that we begin to see that there are memory issues that develop as weeks and months continue. If we start to also realize that not only there are memory issues, but now perhaps we're starting to see a lot of combativeness, a lot of anger, frustration, and even perhaps some of the repetitiveness is beginning to show its face. Now there's a likeliness that we might be looking at something, a situation where now you could have a mixed dementia. So it's very common where you could have vascular dementia was the initial culprit, but now Alzheimer's disease is the second in line. So it's a mixed dementia, very, very common. You sometimes will come across somebody with Lewy body dementia. Now, this is connected with Parkinson's disease. It's important that we recognize that many times with individuals that have Parkinson's diagnoses, that a good 60 to 80% of those that have a Parkinson's diagnosis do tend to show us a form of dementia as the years continue. In particular, with Lewy body dementia, we started hearing more about Lewy body dementia, especially after Robin Williams had taken his life. The comedian certainly hid his decline very well through his humor, but with Lewy body dementia, when I read at one point that he was suffering from, or he had suffered from delusions, I recall myself saying, gosh, I wonder if he had a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. Well, a year later, his wife was actually quoted in a People magazine and she finally brought it to the table and admitted to everyone that her husband did in fact have Lewy body dementia. So anyone that has Lewy body dementia, not only are we going to see the increase of potential fall risks and the tremors that are also quite common with somebody with Parkinson's, but now in particular we're going to see a great deal of hallucinations and delusions. Pretty scary stuff. So imagine your worst nightmare, your worst fear, and perhaps you're kind of living and breathing in it almost on a day-to-day basis. So that would be very common for somebody with Lewy body dementia to have these terrible hallucinations. The frontotemporal lobe dementia can be quite a challenge and also very challenging to diagnose. If we had gone in the direction of a neurologist and we had established that baseline where, oh, by the way, another another important thing when we think of going to a neurologist, in early stages of a decline, we're supposed to be following up with that neurologist every 6 months to a year. As the disease progresses, we should actually be following up equivalent to about every 3 months. If we had gone to that neurologist from day one, in this situation, the frontotemporal lobe dementia piece, and now we took a look at these scans on the brain, but now we're beginning to pick up on terrible damage, terrible shrinking that's occurring on the frontotemporal lobe of somebody. Any kind of damage, any shrinking that goes on in this part of our brain would significantly impact somebody's ability to make decisions. So these individuals would make very poor decisions, very poor irrationale in their planning, and their inappropriateness with wording and decision making. So you could have a person that perhaps, was never, the smartest book on the shelf, perhaps, and they always made bad decisions in life. And so somebody might look at an individual in a family and say, oh gosh, well, you know what, they were always like that, and we need to really pick up on, again, taking notes on what becomes the not so normal thing, though, okay? It is like an extra little tone and twist to something that perhaps it becomes slightly abnormal. So an example of frontotemporal lobe, I'll tell you very fast. I know a gentleman that has resided up in Long Island, New York, where I'm from, where he lived in a beautiful brownstone apartment, and he had it in his mind that it was okay and appropriate every day to go down the road to the local delicatessen, the deli, and order an array of cold cuts and sandwiches galore. And every day he'd make, hundreds of dollars of purchases and take this and go back to the apartment complex and now feed everybody, every single day. Okay. So, and everybody, of course, was like, oh gosh, this is great. You're my best friend. I'm loving this, but family was not aware that he was doing this until finally the power of attorney took a look at his bank account and realized hundreds of dollars were leaving his account and going in the direction of this deli on a day-to-day basis. Finally took her brother to a neurologist where they saw this significant damage in this part of the brain, and they realized that he was no longer able to make appropriate decisions, that from that point on, truly all his financial decision-making abilities were now passed on to, it was clearly he was not able to handle those decisions, and now everything was now passed on to the sister that was appointed to be in that role. But that's kind of an example of frontotemporal lobe dementia. I know too many families with that mess, and it's pretty horrendous. We do see, unfortunately, more women than men that do develop this, and there's also a lot more diagnoses into the ages of 50s and 60s. Lastly, I do want to just make mention of the alcohol-induced dementia. This actually is way too common when you know that we have had a very heavy drinker, for a number of years in our lives, and they've kicked back. And now we begin to see, as years have progressed, that they're having great difficulty recalling information, and their memory is becoming impacted. We start to, many times we do see there has been known to be a connection where people that have perhaps been in first responder roles, people that have played, roles in their life where they were those go-tos. Perhaps they've seen some pretty horrendous thing in their day, between retired veterans to retired police officers to retired firefighters to retired EMT workers, that perhaps there's, refuge in the drink over a number of years, but regardless, there are way too many alcohol-induced dementia cases. Okay, you can go on. Medications, pros and cons. We only have like a whopping, 5 or 6 dementia medications that are even on the market right now. And even for us to get medications on the market, it takes a number of years, many clinical trials, each phase of these clinical trials lasts a good 3 to 4 years at length. If each phase has proved to be successful, then it goes on to the next phase and so forth. So clinical trials, trying to get new medications on the market, is a very long and expensive process. Many times we see if somebody has not been successful with getting a clear-cut diagnosis, Or even this individual is not taking their medications, they are resisting the medication, they're spitting it back out at us, they're not following through with the doctors, they're resistant to leaving the house, they don't want to go to the doctor. Everything is a burden, to the caregiver. It's an increasing, issue that we cannot get this person out of this house, even to go to the doctor, to have an evaluation to determine if the medications that were initially prescribed even a year ago are still the appropriate mix now. Many times we begin to hear the word Aricept being said. Aricept is one of those beginning dementia medications that are prescribed. We need to realize, though, that even that medication is only good on its own for so long. As somebody begins to increase with their decline, and now we're kind of more into the middle of the road with the diagnoses, we are very commonly going to hear perhaps another medication come to the table, and that is Namenda. And many times then we start to see that the Aricept and Namenda are combined as a combination drug, and this combination, known as a cocktail. Not the same yummy cocktails we have after 5 o'clock, but it's a cocktail of sort that goes forward to almost the very end of the disease. And with this mixture, we will see as the disease progresses, what's it really doing? What are these meds doing? Gosh, I don't really see much of a change at all. What is the purpose of these things, right? So I quite often hear families say, I really don't see any change. Well, that's because the dementia medications are typically most useful and beneficial in early to moderate stages of the disease. As the disease moves on, we begin to see that there becomes even less benefit because much of the damage on the brain has already been done. What is it doing is it's basically these medications are helping the individual process information a little bit better. If you're telling me to do multiple things and I'm having trouble following direction and step by step following through with things, you might begin to see somebody very combative and coming back with a lot of vulgarity, perhaps to you. Oh gosh, never heard my mom say a curse before, and all of a sudden these words are now coming out of her mouth, right? If we start to see a lot of confusion, and we're not speaking slowly to them, we need to keep in mind to only give them one task at a time. If we're on the right medications, it clears the way of a lot of misunderstanding and confusion to the point they can kind of grasp a little bit better what that thing is that we're trying to guide them on. If I'm understanding something a little bit better and you're taking your time to explain it and you're not becoming frustrated, you'll see I'll be a lot less combative, I'll be a lot less argumentative, I'll be a lot more cooperative to follow through or attempt to complete a task. So we need to make sure that somebody is always on that right a combination of medications and that we're following through with the doctors in an appropriate fashion to make sure that we are on something correctly. Even when we start to take these dementia medications, we cannot skip a beat. We need to make sure that we are taking them consistently, routinely. If this individual is not taking them consistently, then we're not giving it a chance to build up in their system correctly in order for us to see any great change in their ability and their comprehension. So these meds are this is a very serious situation where we need to make sure that they are being properly managed and supervised. When somebody is very combative and they are resisting medications and perhaps even spitting it back out at us or throwing it underneath, in the garbage or underneath their napkin or what have you, eventually, if there are a lot of behavioral issues in this person, which we will tend to see that. It wouldn't surprise me if we then had to go down the road, call 911, and now we're in a hospital setting. If we try to stabilize somebody in a hospital, we'll also see that after perhaps a small number of days, the hospital can only do so much with trying to stabilize somebody, and they will again ask to try to put in place a safe discharge. We might see that if we have to try to bring this person home, well, gosh, again, same scenario. Did we ever have the care in the house? Did they ever accept it? Oh, maybe we shouldn't just bring this person straight home again. Maybe we should start to consider a facility. It wouldn't surprise me also, though, if at a hospital standpoint, there is only so much we can do to stabilize somebody there, but we're still seeing a lot of combativeness, that it wouldn't surprise me if now it was suggested to a family to go on to a psychiatric hospital. Realize that that is a short-term situation, and that's only for a couple of days, just a number of weeks. We are still going to be up against a rock and a hard place, though, because now, after we've attempted to stabilize somebody, we now have to see which facility perhaps is going to be willing to now take this person, because now we have a track record. And if we are trying to bring this person home, how successful is that going to be again if they've never accepted the care from day one? Many times we see that physicians or again, neurologists might not necessarily share with the family information concerning clinical trials. It's important that families are aware of clinical trials and the benefit of perhaps being part of something like this. Truly, the more people we get involved with clinical trials, the better, because now we're going to have more of an opportunity to test out these drugs and be able to get more on the market for ourselves, potentially now come to an end with this disease, and as well as the other dementias. When you're part of a clinical trial, though, there's a huge commitment. It could be for a good year or more. So if I, though, had the placebo, but you had the real medication, and now they've been able to prove that that medication is successful, and now it's allowed to be provided on the market, but we were all part of the same clinical trial, then I also would have been permitted now to have that same medication. I would be able to take advantage of that same medication, though initially was not given to me. A big point for us to realize, though, with clinical trials, too, is that we can get the PET scan for free. The PET scan is one of the most accurate ways that we can determine even Alzheimer's disease. Very accurate testing. Usually PET scans are not covered by insurance. Many times I see that that is a good $10,000 or more, believe it or not, for this particular type of test. But it does give us a very high percentage of certainty that this is looking like perhaps Alzheimer's disease. So many times you might see that somebody says, oh, well, I thought I could only get that confirmed diagnosis through, let's say, an autopsy. We'll realize that we have a lot of great technology at our fingertips now. And if we do go on to that neurologist and we do have the proper testing done, we are now able to really look at these scans with great certainty to help us to identify the likeliness that this is looking like one disease versus another, which is very crucial in our own planning and strategizing. Okay, next screen.
Joan, we're actually well over our time. I wanted to maybe see if there's just one or two more points you wanted to make, and then see if there's any questions.
Sure. The last point I just want to bring up to you is to again make you aware of who I am representing and my role in what Interim HealthCare, home care, and hospice does. We are actually the oldest home franchise agency in the United States. We were the very first ones that kicked off the home care piece with our headquarters in Florida, and our office that I come from is here in Virginia Beach, which we cover throughout the Hampton Roads area. So we get involved with companion personal care, skilled care, rehabilitative care, and our highest level of care is hospice. So that's a quick summary.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Amy and Mark and see if they have any questions for you before we end. All right, you're both unmuted. Do either of you have any questions you'd like to ask Joan?
No, I think we're good.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you're each perhaps able to walk away from this discussion, knowing something different or looking at it in a different way. You can certainly, realize why perhaps this presentation goes on for quite a length of time, even though we tried to scale this down a bit. And we're going to continue with this presentation, again in 2 weeks' time, the second portion of it.
That's great.
Okay, well, thank you. Please let me know if I can be of any help to anyone. You can certainly reach out to me directly at 406-4236 is my direct work cell.
And we are going to be having the Continuum of Care program on Thursday evening. Isn't that correct, Joan?
Correct.
Yes. So
this is repeating of today.
yes. So if you missed anything, or if you know of anyone who would like to be a part of this, then please let them know. It's going to be Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Okay, and on that note, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.